Welcome back, guys. We're going to try something a bit different today. I'm going to be speaking a bit more off the cuff, and it's about speculation, which I sometimes do, but usually I stay away from unless I think I can actually add something that's more deep, insightful, or just a completely different perspective. Otherwise, I tend to let things like A Great Book of Grudges or Lore Master of Sotek to cover these things because they do such a great job. I'm not just going to manufacture just repeat content just for clicks or views, but here we're talking about the High Elves and the upcoming DLC. And I'm going to quickly run through this. So just to clarify, I do not have any leaks. This is purely based on deduction, but this is the easiest DLC to deduct what will actually be in there. I'm going to show you the methodology of looking at the previous DLC templates, applying it to this faction being the High Elves, and essentially tell you there's only basically 18 possible units, and most likely there will be 9 because there's always 9 basic units and 3 regiments of renown, going on the basis where logically this DLC will follow the same structure as the previous ones, where there will be a legendary lord and 1 legendary hero, except for the demonic faction, in this case being Slaanesh. They will gain another legendary hero, and likely the free LC Lord will also be Slaanesh to flesh out their roster to 4 factions. But sticking with the High Elves, this means they'll simply have 1 legendary Lord and legendary hero, but they will also have 1 new base Lord and 1 base hero. This means there will be 5 new units, including 1 large monster, and there's potentially 2 that it could be, but let's just dive straight into this. So in terms of legendary lords, there are only 2 left that it could possibly be. We have Lord Aislinn, as well as the Lore Master, Belania, and there's not a lot of point in going in that direction. We have enough casters in the High Elves, and Lord Aislinn, this is called the Tides. Come on, it has to be him, obviously. And he's not only the most interesting, he's the most requested, as well as he rides the Sky Cutter, which will most likely be the centerpiece model. So I'm including the Sky Cutter as an auto include for this. So let's just knock off first our legendary lord. We have Aislinn. There has to be at least 1 large monster centerpiece unit, but there's also room for potentially a second one. So I'm not going to include this in here, but there also is the Merworm. There was potentially a rumored leak where the Merworm was going to be the monstrous unit, and I'm not going to rule it out. It technically could be there, and it might seem a bit odd to have it there in the middle of the battlefield, but it is a possibility. Now, normally I would have dismissed the Merworm straight out of hand. The reason why it's still in this speculation is simply because there are so few units left to choose for the High Elves. They're almost complete, but I'm going to run through not only from the basis of what's left over, but what they actually need in terms of the TotalWar game system and how that would complement it. Just a quick apology if you hear rain in the background. I'm having to record this in a shed. It's tough. I'm sorry about the audio quality. I really can't help it. Otherwise, I just can't upload. But let's focus on the legendary heroes now. And again, we're going to focus on who it can't be. There are 3 choices it could possibly be. First of all, we have Corhill, and he is a legendary white line of Crace, and we basically have that same character in Alistair, who's a legendary lord now. There's no point stepping on these toes. You could just rename that character Corhill, and he's effectively there. The next alternative would be Celophin, and she's basically a monster hunter. Not that interesting having a Slayer style character, especially when you consider the alternative is Caradhrian, who is a boss, basically heroic Phoenix Guard. There is the Phoenix Guard hero, which is called the Anointed of Assyrian. Caradhrian is just a legendary variant of that, as well as he rides on a freaking Frost Phoenix. Very awesome. No doubt he will give some bonuses to Phoenix units, which is great because I think Phoenix units are already great, but they really should be the unit that the High Elves lean heavily into because their whole ethos, their whole identity is built around this creature, so it's fantastic. We will now have a legendary hero that will help bolster them. He's also going to no doubt bolster Phoenix Guard, so if you do want to make an infantry army which really leans into those high tier units, Caradhrian will absolutely be an excellent hero to back any high tier army. Since we're nearly certain that Caradhrian will be our legendary hero, that means we don't need the Anointed of Assyrian as our regular hero. This leaves the only alternative to be the Mistweaver, which is a hybrid caster for the Uvrest faction, but we've already got Ulthuan in the game, so let's lean to the realistic choice which aligns perfectly with Aislinn, which is the Lothan Sea Helm, a fantastic support hero which will no doubt bolster Lothan Sea Guard, some of the newer units we're about to mention here, and might even bolster bolt throwers as well. Just a quick reminder, guys, if you are enjoying the video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out. Ask any question in the comments. I answer everything. And if you'd like to talk strategy, feel free to join the Discord. Cheers. Now our final character for this DLC will be the regular Lord choice. It has to be the Lord of Anarion, and this is actually way cooler than it does sound. This is someone who has the blood of Anarion. He is a descendant of Anarion, so think of just a diet Tyrion in a sense. This character type can tap into the curse of Cain, making them harder to kill and even more vicious in melee, and melee is what they do and what they do very well, so this will give you a solid frontliner. They might need to even respec the Prince character type to be an even greater general, basically pulling them away from the melee role, because this is what your melee hitter will be. If you want a frontline melee lord, it will be the Lord of Anarion. So those are the 5 choices I am near certain will be in this DLC. I really can't see them not being there, and the Merworm, I won't rule it out, but I'm not going to include it in those 5 because I don't think it'll be there. So for the basic units, let's start at what will be most likely, and that is the only entry left in the basic units from the 8th edition army book, and that is the Warrior. The Warrior, like many other units on the tabletop, can be spec'd with different variations and different outloadings, but we are going to assume that this unit needs to fill the only hole left in the High Elf roster, and that is the sword and the shield. You can have this unit, the Warrior is a melee unit, and they can wield both swords in both hands, but the Ranger already does that in a loose fitting formation, so this will most likely basically be the High Elf's answer to the Bleak Swords of the Dark Elf roster. They will be a sword and shield infantry unit. They're not going to replace your spears by any means, but in the dead center of your formation, they might be the better choice because they will be better at grinding down other infantry, albeit at the cost of not having the anti-large. However, it's a role, it needs filling, and it would more importantly complete the 8th edition army book, so my bet and my money strongly is on the Warrior class being sword and shield spec'd out, maybe in a loose formation, but probably in a tight formation. On that note, I would also like to see technology that allows basic spears, as well as silver and guard, to get a shield wall similar ability to that of the dwarfs. Basically give them an even better ability to, when they stand and brace, interlocking their shields, giving them some extra bonus to just show that spearman supremacy the High Elves are known for. Now the next 2 entries are quite exciting because they are so closely tied to Aislinn, and it's always great when a DLC has units that just speak the language and are so closely linked to the legendary lord that they are a part of, and these are the Ships Company and the Ulthuan Sea Rangers. Now, whilst the Ships Company fits Aislinn very well, I'm less confident they'll actually make it into the final product, simply because we're starting to get a lot of overlap with these basic infantry units. Perhaps they could be employed as a support unit with possibly some bonuses, some auras, and some triggered abilities to maybe restock the ammunition of other units, as well as maybe bolster the leadership using banners. There's a few things up our sleeve we can still use here. And as for the Ulthuan Sea Rangers, this is a unit that can potentially be an armor piercing variant, possibly coming in still with a bow, of course, but dealing some armor piercing damage and maybe acting as a hybrid unit similar to Blackheart Corsairs. There's a lot of different things we can do with them, maybe having high caliber bows with a shorter range. The choices really are endless here, but I'm sure CA will find a loose hole in the roster for these units to fit so they have some purpose. Speaking of purpose, a beloved unit is the White Lions of Crace, and they really have suffered basically of being only really viable in my mind for probably about 20 to 30 turns in the campaign. And the thing is, before this, you're not fighting a lot of armor, and after this point, you're much better off going for Phoenix Guard if you are so worried. So what I would actually suggest here is upgrading the White Lions of Crace and making them anti-large. Basically a cheaper, more affordable version of the Phoenix Guard. This would allow us to push the White Lions of Crace up to tier 4, and even if they're not used that much, at least they'll be up there storytelling wise, RPG wise. We'll be able to hit much harder with some improved stats, albeit at a higher cost, and I think it'll make a large percentage of the fandom a bit happier if they just kind of suck less. Now for one choice that's gone under a few people's radars, I'll bet, is the Illyrian Reaver with the spear and bow. Now, just trust me, hear me out for a second. The Illyrian Reaver with the bow is one of the best skirmish cavalry in the game. Fantastic, can shoot while it fires, good range, good accuracy, great unit. However, we don't have any high elf cavalry which wield spears, i.e. we don't have any anti-large cavalry. So we can fit this just by having a tier 3 variant of the Illyrian Reaver which has both a bow as well as a spear. So when it does come into melee with other cavalry, it can deal some anti-large damage. This would be an exceptionally dangerous piece of cavalry and it would complete the roster. Now the last two units I think would be quite easily bound up into a single entry, and those are the Shadow Warrior Novices and the Shadow Weavers. So the Shadow Weavers are basically low level casters, and the Shadow Warrior Novices, well, you can work out what they are. But the thing is, if you look at Aislinn's entry in his army book, it mentions that his standard strike squad are Sea Guard as well as Shadow Warriors. He is a hit and run style general who comes in, smashes the enemy before they even blinked, and then pulls out of there. But now, one last thing, where is Aislinn's Sea Lord going to start? And that I cannot answer. So he is actually lore-wise a fantastic opponent for Norsca. So I wasn't admittedly that big on Norsca being an opponent, but reading up on Aislinn, it's actually a really great choice. He's just following the coastline here, smashing Norscans and making sure they never ever think twice about invading Ulthuan. But where else would we put them? Well, when I did my last predictions video, I said, let's put Aislinn down here. We'll eventually get Koresh and Ind opening up, and this would allow us to have some at least long-term goal of hunting down Lockyer Felhard. So we've got Navy versus Navy, but even still, if they actually expand the map just a little bit further down here, you could put Aislinn right here, and he again would get that confrontation, which everyone's hoping for. However, this gets him a bit out of the proximity of fighting the Norscans, so there is every chance he'll end up finding his way somewhere across the north, but that's where you can most likely expect to see him. He'll either be in one of these port islands down the bottom, but most likely we'll see him across the top, ready to fight some Norscans. Although for a starting location, I think opening up Nippon and having him start over there would actually be pretty damn cool, if you ask me. And next up, let's discuss the changes which are almost certainly happening. Now, I can't guarantee influence will even still be in the next version of the high elves we get. I would like it still to be, but who knows, they could rework the whole thing. See, I've been doing some massive overhauls. I would like us to have some option to be able to do intrigue at the court and impact all of our neighbours on a diplomatic level, but also talking behind their backs and ruining their relations or improving them to help facilitate our own goals is always good. We could also have the tech tree reworked to require influence to get some of the more powerful and more high tier abilities, but also there's some technologies here that don't benefit all the units they should, and it would be nice to get this tree looked at, and I'm sure, I have no doubt, they've reworked every other tech tree so far, they'll rework this one as well. Next up, let's talk trade. Trade should be a far greater component of the high elf economy than it is. And what do I mean by that? The thing is, their buildings actually still produce a really good amount of gold, and it doesn't really take a lot to be able to have a self-sustaining land-based empire. The Dark Elves depend on the coastline. If you build in and ignore and lose all your coastal provinces, you are screwed as the Dark Elves. The High Elves are called the Sea Elves. They should be just as dependent on holding ports, but not just that, they should also be dependent on keeping their allies alive. I think there should be a comparative advantage style system by which when you trade with, say, the Empire, certain things like maybe gold and clay, then you will get bonuses, multipliers to those. You should have, the more trade partners you have who produce a certain resource better, should have a force multiplier effect on you, and then that should also be compounded by the number of ports you do own. But you should be, how great would it be to have a campaign where you don't just want to paint the map, you actually have allies that you want to keep alive. There's been several instances in world history where they've attacked someone and they would have made more money in the long term by keeping them friendly and trading with them and allowing their expertise to keep on developing and then trading with that comparative advantage. That would be fantastic to have in this, like similar to the Wood Elves. The Wood Elves, you don't really want to map paint with them. The best play with them is to build up a tree, secure the diplomacy, move to another tree. This is the way that it should be. You are incentivized to play that character the way you should. Wood Elves don't want to go out living in the desert. They hate leaving the forest. So why not make a similar thing where we want to just basically trade with everyone rather than conquering them, acting like the world police, they can maybe gain and use their influence to get oversight over other ports with these trade partners, so they can kind of get their old abilities back, but just something a bit more interesting where we are really looking at those resources that we control, what our friends control, keeping those trade lanes free. Maybe a mechanic that Aislinn can have will free the sea from piracy and allow even more multipliers, but that network of trade should really be what the High Elves are aiming to do. Now, last up, the faction mechanics. It's pretty safe to say that we've got Avalon. Avalon are good. Avalon are pretty cool. They've got some unique mechanics, and I think they're quite nice. I do think that the feud between her and Crone Hellebron could maybe get a bit of attention at some point, but overall, she's a very, very strong legendary lord with a really great faction, and it's fun and different, and that's what we really want. Altharion, overall, the most polished and mechanically certainly the most complex High Elf faction. He really doesn't need a lot more, so when the race is just tweaked and updated, I'm sure he'll function just fine. Imrik, same deal. He's a flex campaign in the middle of nowhere. He should remain a difficult flex campaign because that's his charm. Ulthuan, same deal. Ulthuan has always been great. Again, so all these DLC, for an FLC Lord, he's always been one of the best. So it comes down to the ones that need attention are Tyrion and Teclis. Teclis, I believe, will have a similar mechanic to Gelt. Even from afar, Teclis should be able to run everything from Safri, be able to build up a college of his own mages, and even if you just copy and paste this mechanic, it is so good and so powerful, and that's what people want with Teclis. People want to have an army of the most elite mages, and they want to just throw sparkly crap against all the other heavy hitters, namely Kairos Fateweaver, and we can finally have this amazing showdown of the two most powerful premier spellcasters in the world, and that's what that campaign should be. But overall, essentially, these are my predictions. Here's the list here of everything I do believe will make it into the upcoming DLC, and I've got highlighted in green are the things I think are certainly going to happen. Yellows are maybes, and yeah, hopefully we'll see how this goes, but I would say I'd be very surprised if I have more than 25% of this wrong. These videos are also a great opportunity to discuss what we do or don't like about a faction. Hopefully we can provide some feedback to the devs so they can create some DLC that we all like and we get the experience we're asking for. But that's it for this video. Please consider liking, sharing, subbing. I will catch you next time. Cheers.